In a wild land, where a pack of hungry wolves lurks, a helpless foal is abandoned, its fate hanging by just a few breaths. But as all hope fades into the dark, a stallion, as powerful as a raging storm, emerges to protect this fragile life. Can strength truly defy a fate already sealed? This is not just a battle between freedom, life, and death, it's a confrontation between a heart filled with courage and the merciless forces of nature. Can one heart survive the cruelty of destiny? Brace yourself for the unimaginable. The story begins now. The sky slowly sinks into the vibrant twilight, as the final rays of the sun dissolve into the horizon, leaving behind a silence that blankets the vast, endless plains. A cold wind cuts sharply through the dry grasses, carrying whispers of things yet to come, as if the very breath of nature is held in anticipation. In this place, where life and death coexist, freedom and fear are inseparable, always dancing on the edge of each other. In the middle of this barren wilderness, Solan, the young Mustang Foal, stands lost and alone, trembling in the chilling cold of the twilight. Only a few days old, its weak legs can barely hold steady against the hard, frozen ground. The tremors within it are not just from the cold but from the paralyzing fear that consumes its very core. The crushing loneliness wraps tightly around its mind, as its mother, the strong mare, has left to find water, abandoning it in this vast world where life and death are always just a step away from each other. Solan doesn't understand why its mother left it behind. Fear spreads through its veins like wildfire, leaving it rooted to the spot, hoping for a miracle. The overwhelming feeling of abandonment fills the air around it, suffocating it in silence. There is no sound of another creature, no comforting presence. Only the cold, relentless wind, and the creeping darkness waiting to devour it whole. But then, in the midst of this chilling stillness, when everything seems to be fading, a massive figure emerges from the distant ridge. Caden, a mature Mustang stallion, his coat as dark as night, and his eyes sharp with power and command. A warrior not just strong, but a symbol of freedom, once captured by humans, now escaped, having become a leader of his own destiny. Caden's gaze fixes on Solan, as if he perceives something greater than life itself in the frail creature before him. Caden is not here to seek food, nor is he fleeing the brutality of nature. He is here to protect, and when he sees Solan in its desperate state, he knows he cannot let this fragile life be consumed by death. But protecting Solan will stir deep inner conflicts within Caden, torn between his unwavering desire for freedom and his newfound role as a protector. Caden is not just a guardian, he is a sacrifice, caught between his freedom and the duty to defend what is vulnerable. Can Caden protect Solan without losing himself in the process? This is a battle not only between survival and ideals, but between freedom and sacrifice, between life and death. And as the mists of nature blanket the land, will the price of freedom be too high to pay? With Caden's protection, Solan felt a fleeting sense of safety, but the calm didn't last. As the twilight deepened, a chilling silence settled over the plains. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of danger, and the wolves were closing in, closer than ever before. This time, Caden would face not just predators, but a force of nature that would test everything he had. The twilight sky deepened, casting long shadows over the vast plains. The final rays of sunlight slipped away, leaving a thick, cold air that seemed to carry the scent of both life and death. Solan, still small and trembling, stood in the middle of the tall grass, its fragile body quivering against the biting wind. The wilderness around it was vast and unforgiving, a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. The foal could feel something ominous hanging in the air, as though the very earth itself was holding its breath. Not far away, in the shadowed hills, a pack of wolves was steadily closing in. Fenrir, the alpha wolf, led the pack with methodical precision, his coat sleek and silver, blending seamlessly with the twilight. He was a master of strategy, and the wolves had hunted many creatures before. But they had never encountered a Mustang like this. They had seen Mustangs, wild, swift, and tough, but this was different. Caden was no ordinary Mustang. His muscles rippled beneath his sleek coat, his broad shoulders and powerful chest gave him the presence of a storm waiting to break, a force of nature in every step. Fenrir and his pack had encountered herds of wild horses before, but never one with the sheer size, strength, and dominance that Caden commanded. The wolves paused, hesitating as they locked eyes with Caden. His eyes blazed with untamed fury, burning brighter than the fading light. Caden's frame was a solid wall of muscle and power, standing taller and more imposing than any wolf in the pack. The ground trembled beneath him as he advanced. The wind howled in his wake, as if even the very earth was in awe of the stallion's force. The wolves, usually so confident in their pursuit, now found themselves staring at something they had never anticipated, a creature that embodied the wild more than they ever could. Fenrir had witnessed many battles, fought countless adversaries, but in that moment, he knew, this was no ordinary stallion. Caden wasn't just a wild animal fighting to protect, he was a living embodiment of strength and defiance. His mere appearance sent ripples of intimidation through the pack, causing them to falter for a brief moment, uncertain if they could ever overpower him. The wolves were predators, but for the first time, they were the ones who felt like prey. The moment stretched out, as Caden's presence alone made the pack rethink their plan. The alpha wolf, Fenrir, his confidence faltering for the first time, bristled. This was not just a fight for survival, it was a confrontation between nature's might and the cold calculation of predators. Caden charged like an unstoppable force of nature, his hooves striking the earth with the power of a thunderclap. The air was filled with the sound of his galloping charge, each hoofbeat shattering the silence of the plains. The pack was thrown into disarray with every strike. Their calculations fell apart as the stallion's savage strength overwhelmed them, each wolf being knocked backward, stunned by the power and speed Caden unleashed. The alpha wolf, Fenrir, the one who had carefully planned this attack, now found himself forced to retreat. His pack scattered, their coordinated efforts crumbling under Caden's brutal onslaught. Fenrir let out a low, frustrated growl, knowing that no matter how many times they tried, they could not defeat this force of nature. With one final thundering charge, Caden sent Fenrir sprawling, his hooves striking with such force that the alpha wolf was thrown into the air. He landed with a painful thud, and the remaining wolves hesitated, their once unbreakable resolve now shattered. Fenrir howled in defeat as the pack slowly retreated, the battle lost. Caden stood tall, his breathing heavy but steady. His eyes scanned the horizon, alert for any more threats. He didn't turn back to the wilderness immediately, he remained by Solan's side. In the aftermath of the battle, as the wolves disappeared into the shadows, the connection between Caden and Solan solidified. Caden didn't just protect Solan from physical danger, in that moment, he also gave Solan the safety of trust, a bond that would carry them forward into the unknown wilds. There was no need for words. Caden's stance, his steady gaze, spoke louder than any promise ever could. The wolves were gone, and for a brief moment, peace seemed possible. But the wilderness never offers peace for long. As Caden and Solan moved forward, each step carried with it the weight of a new challenge. Solan had learned much, but the wild had not finished shaping him. This was a journey not just of survival, but of becoming, of finding the strength within to stand tall in a world that demanded everything. The morning light was soft on the horizon, casting a gentle glow over the endless plains. The wind was sharp, the kind that cut through the thick coat of a Mustang and filled the air with the scent of the wilderness. Caden and Solan moved together through the tall grass, the young foal learning, growing, and discovering what it meant to be truly wild. Every day was a lesson. Caden, ever watchful, would guide Solan with a sharp eye and firm steps. Yet, it wasn't just the practical skills that Caden imparted, how to survive, find food, avoid predators. It was a lesson in freedom, in the very soul of the Mustang, that Solan began to grasp. As they traversed the vast plains, Solan felt the weight of the wilderness on his shoulders, but also the exhilarating taste of unfettered freedom, something that lived in the bones of every Mustang. Survival isn't just about finding shelter or food, Caden said one evening as they stopped by a flowing river, the sun sinking low in the sky. It's about knowing who you are in this world. We don't bend to it. We live in it. We fight for our place. And we must do so without fear. Solan listened, its eyes fixed on the elder Mustang, the embodiment of strength and wisdom. Caden's presence was unwavering, calm, and knowing, like the earth itself, grounded in something ancient. And for the first time, Solan felt the stirring of something deep within, courage. As the days passed, Solan's once fragile frame grew stronger, and its gait more assured. From trembling hooves, Solan moved like a force of nature itself, no longer burdened by the fear that once held it back. But there were moments, in the dead of night when the world was still and the wind whispered across the plains, that Solan's thoughts would drift inward, wrestling with a different kind of battle. Alone under the blanket of stars, the young Mustang would often lie awake, the weight of its own thoughts heavy. Solan thought of the day its mother had left, and how it had felt abandoned, alone in a vast, uncaring world. Solan's heart ached at the memory of being small, fragile, and unprepared. The wild had seemed too big, too unforgiving. But now, as the moon cast a silvery glow across the plains, Solan faced something far more daunting, the realization that the world was not a place to fear. It had Caden, and in Caden, it had found something even more important than survival. It had found the will to live. Solan had learned to navigate the world, not through force alone, but through a deep understanding of the wild, a place that was as much about heart and spirit as it was about strength. Yet fear still lingered. Solan wondered, could it really be free? Could it stand tall when the world closed in? Could it fight not just for survival, but for the freedom of its soul? As Caden led the herd to a new valley, Solan felt a deep sense of belonging. The valley, lush and peaceful, seemed to welcome them. The grass was rich, the waters ran clear, and the mountains stood tall in the distance like silent sentinels. It was a place that would sustain them, where Solan could finally rest, knowing it was no longer the frightened foal, but a young Mustang who had grown in both spirit and strength. The herd settled in. Caden, the leader, stood tall, ever vigilant, while Solan roamed the plains alongside the other Mustangs. It felt as if the entire world was alive with possibilities, and for the first time, Solan truly understood what it meant to be part of this wild, unbroken land. The bond with Caden deepened, not just as a protector and the protected, but as companions, equals. Caden's pride in Solan was evident, though unsaid. It was in the way Caden looked at the young Mustang, the way they moved together, like one heart and two bodies. Solan had become more than just a learner, it had become a warrior, and in that role, it knew that it would never again be left behind. This was its world now. But peace, fleeting as it was, would not last forever. One morning, the sound of hooves echoed through the valley, faint at first, but unmistakable. Humans. Solan, now grown but still young in the ways of battle, felt a wave of panic. The humans, with their traps, their ropes, and their machines, had the power to strip the Mustangs of their freedom. For a moment, Solan's legs trembled, the old fear creeping in again. But then, Caden's voice broke the silence. "We fight for our lives," he said, his voice unwavering. "We will not be taken. We run, we fight, and we stand strong." The herd, led by Caden, surged into action. Solan felt the surge of adrenaline, the call to action coursing through its veins. It wasn't just the safety of its herd at stake anymore. It was the freedom of all Mustangs, and Solan had found its place within that fight. Solan charged alongside Caden, its heart pounding in its chest. Each hoofbeat brought it closer to the action, closer to the realization that it had learned to face fear head-on. The humans advanced, ropes ready, but the Mustangs were quicker, stronger, and more agile. Caden led the charge, but Solan was no longer following. It was leading its own charge, fighting for its family, for the freedom it now understood it could never surrender. As the battle unfolded, Solan's hooves struck with a fierce precision. The wolves in the distance were no longer the only threat, it was these humans, bent on breaking the wild spirit of the Mustang. Solan fought not just with strength, but with the spirit of freedom that Caden had taught it to value. And together, they sent the humans fleeing, the Mustangs victorious once again. As the dust settled and the herd stood victorious, Solan stood tall beside Caden, no longer a foal, but a full-fledged Mustang, part of something much greater than itself. The wild had shaped it into something unbreakable, and now, more than ever, it understood the depth of the bond it shared with Caden. It was a bond forged in survival, strength, and freedom. Together, they had survived the wilderness, and together, they would continue to roam, forever free. The battle had been won, but it was not just the earth beneath their hooves that had changed. The winds of fate had shifted, carrying with them a weight far heavier than any battle fought. Solan, no longer just a protector, stood at the edge of the world it once feared, now tasked with a duty greater than survival. As the herd found peace in the valley, the weight of leadership settled upon Solan's shoulders. The journey that began with fear and uncertainty had led to this, the passing of the torch, the next chapter in the wild story of the Mustangs. The sun was low, casting a long, golden shadow across the plains. Solan stood on the hill, eyes fixed on the horizon, feeling the weight of the land beneath its hooves. It had grown strong in the wild, but now, standing in the quiet after the battle, the enormity of its task felt almost too much to bear. Caden stood by its side, the shadows of their past battles stretching long behind them. He did not speak, but his presence was enough. In the calm after the storm, Solan could feel the space between them, no longer a student and mentor, but something more. The time had come for Solan to lead, to carry the burden of the wild forward. "The wild is yours now, Solan." Caden's voice broke the silence, not as a warrior alone, but as a protector. "What you've learned is only the beginning. Lead with the heart, not just the hooves. Protect with courage, but also with wisdom." Solan's heart thundered in its chest, unsure whether to feel fear or pride. The thought of leading the herd, guiding them through the wild, was both an honor and an overwhelming responsibility. The young Mustang could feel the echoes of its past fears, the fear of being alone, the fear of failing. But this was different. It had learned. It had fought. And now, it would lead. The distant rumble of hooves shattered the stillness, the sound a stark reminder that the peace was fragile. Humans had returned, their intentions clear. Ropes, traps, and nets, the very tools of oppression, filled the air as they came, eager to reclaim what they had lost. Solan's body tensed, but it no longer felt like the frightened foal of days past. It had grown stronger, braver. "Stay close." Caden's voice was firm, but there was something in it, something deeper than the usual authority. Solan nodded, its heart racing. This was no longer just a battle to survive, it was a battle for everything the Mustang stood for: freedom, unity, and the spirit of the wild. Solan stood beside Caden, the two of them leading the herd into the fray, each step echoing with purpose. The battle was swift, a dance of hooves against earth and ropes against air. But this was no longer just a fight for survival, this was a declaration. The Mustangs were not to be tamed, not to be owned. Solan fought with the force of everything it had learned, not just with its body, but with its heart. Each strike, each maneuver was filled with love for its herd, its home, its freedom. And as Caden fought beside it, Solan understood, this was the lesson in the fight for life, for identity, for belonging. The humans, realizing the futility of their mission, fled, defeated not just by the hooves of the Mustangs, but by the indomitable will of the wild. As the battle faded into silence, Solan stood, chest heaving, the weight of its victory settling in. "You fought like a leader," Caden said, his voice softer than it had ever been. "The herd is yours now." The evening sun cast a warm glow over the valley, painting the landscape in shades of orange and purple. The herd was quiet, still, resting after the battle. Solan, however, could feel its heart racing once more. It wasn't fear anymore, but something deeper, responsibility. Caden approached, his movements slow and deliberate, as though the world itself had come to a halt. "The time has come," Caden said, looking deep into Solan's eyes. "You've fought for them, you've protected them. It's your turn now." Solan felt a wave of uncertainty, not unlike the first time it had stood alone in the wild. It wasn't the same fear, but a new kind of fear, the fear of losing what it had learned, the fear of not being enough. But then, as it looked around at the herd, it realized it had already changed. The herd no longer saw it as a foal to protect, but as a leader, one that had earned its place. "You are the future," Caden whispered, his eyes filled with pride. "And the future is in your hooves." Solan nodded, feeling the full weight of leadership press down, but this time, it welcomed it. The torch had been passed, not just from Caden to Solan, but from the wild to the new generation. The freedom, the spirit, the wild soul of the Mustangs was now Solan's to protect. Nightfall came, and the world around Solan seemed to hold its breath. Standing atop the hill, Solan surveyed the valley below. The herd was safe, for now, but the wild was always unpredictable. Still, Solan no longer felt the uncertainty that once clouded its thoughts. It was ready. Caden stood behind, a figure of quiet strength, watching as Solan stood at the precipice of its future. In the distance, the mountains loomed, silent and eternal. This was the journey ahead, and it was now Solan's to lead. "The journey never ends," Caden said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "You will face challenges, Solan. But remember this, leadership is not just about strength. It is about heart. Lead with that, and the herd will follow." Solan felt the truth of Caden's words sink deep into its soul. It had always known the importance of freedom, but now, it understood the deeper meaning of leadership, the ability to love and protect, to sacrifice and lead by example. "We are Mustang. We run free," Solan whispered to itself. "And we will never be broken." With that, Solan turned to face the herd, the future stretching out before them, wild and untamed. As the wind picked up, Solan's mane rippled in the breeze, and for the first time, it truly felt like the leader it was born to be. The wild had no end, no finality. But for Solan, this was just the beginning. As Solan led the herd into the vast expanse, the winds of change swept through the valley, echoing the lessons of the past and carrying them forward into the future. The journey of survival had transformed into a journey of leadership, and with it, came the deeper question of what it truly means to be free. The wild world around them, full of promise and peril, would no longer be a place to merely survive, it would be a world to understand, to protect, and to embrace. Solan had learned to lead, but now it was time to learn the true meaning of freedom. The golden horizon stretched endlessly before the herd, the land as wild and untamed as the spirit that carried them forward. Solan stood at the head of the group, its heart both heavy and light, knowing that the journey ahead was far from simple. It had learned to protect, to lead, and to fight, but now, it had to learn to live in its freedom. With each step, Solan could feel the winds whispering through the tall grasses, as if the land itself was speaking, not just to the herd, but to Solan, urging it to understand the true weight of its leadership. The wild, in its unyielding beauty and danger, was not simply a realm to conquer, it was a place that needed to be respected, protected, and understood. The lessons passed down from Caden were not only about strength and survival. They were about honoring the spirit of freedom, about embracing the responsibility that came with it. Freedom was not a gift that could be taken lightly. It was earned through struggle, through loss, and through sacrifice. And now, Solan would carry that knowledge forward. Freedom is not a destination, Solan, Caden's voice echoed in Solan's mind, it is a way of life, something we must live every day. It is not just about what we fight for, but about how we choose to live for it. As Solan gazed over the herd, the weight of leadership settled more deeply, and with it came a deeper understanding of the lessons that Caden had taught. Solan was not just leading the herd, it was now part of a much greater journey. The freedom they fought for was not a solitary endeavor. It was a collective struggle, one that bound them all together in a shared purpose. Caden's teachings had been a gift, but they were also a burden that came with the realization that freedom requires responsibility. It required not just protecting those who were vulnerable, but also honoring the wild spirit that sustained them all. Solan knew that true freedom wasn't just about escaping the chains of captivity, it was about understanding the balance between the wild's harshness and its beauty. It was about being a protector of the land and all who roamed upon it, ensuring that the freedom of one did not come at the expense of another. Leadership meant making choices that would preserve the future of the wild, choices that might not always be easy. Solan's journey was no longer just a tale of survival, it was a story of learning, of growing into the role that the world had set before it. The lessons of freedom were not just for the Mustangs, but for all who seek to live without boundaries, without fear, and with respect for the world around them. The wild would always challenge them, but it would also always teach. Solan's heart swelled with pride, but also with the realization that the journey ahead would require strength, compassion, and most of all, the courage to face the unknown. The story of Solan and Caden is not just one of survival, it is a story of connection. Connection to the land, to the creatures who roam it, and most importantly, to the very spirit of freedom that drives them. But beyond that, this is a story that calls upon each of us to examine our own relationship with freedom, responsibility, and the natural world. In a world that often feels disconnected from nature, Solan's journey reminds us of the importance of listening to the earth, of understanding our place within the natural order. Freedom, in its purest form, is not about dominance over the world around us, it is about living in harmony with it, about protecting what we hold dear and honoring the balance that allows us to thrive. The wild teaches us lessons that no classroom can. It teaches us that true leadership comes from within, from an understanding of our roles in the greater story of life. Solan has learned that freedom is not something to be grasped, it is something to be earned, protected, and preserved for future generations. The story of the Mustang is a reminder that the wild is not something to be tamed, it is something to be celebrated, respected, and protected. And as we look to the future, may we take the lessons of the Mustang herd to heart, and may we all lead with the same courage, loyalty, and compassion that Solan has shown. Solan's journey is not just a reflection of the wild spirit of the Mustang, it is a call to action. A call to protect the freedom we cherish, to understand the land we live on, and to lead with our hearts, just as Solan has done.